I found the hotel receipt in her coat pocket on a Tuesday. I wasn't snooping. Margaret had asked me to grab her reading glasses from the hall closet, and when I reached into the navy peacoat she'd worn to her book club meeting, my fingers brushed against the folded paper. The Grand Marlowe Hotel, room 412. 2 nights, 3 weeks ago, when she'd told me she was visiting her sister in Providence. I stood there in the hallway for what must have been 10 minutes, holding that receipt like it might dissolve if I stared at it long enough. The afternoon light came through the window at that particular angle it only achieves in late October, turning everything amber and fragile. Dust motes hung suspended in the air. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so beautiful while it was ending. But here's the thing, and this is what I've been turning over and over in my mind during these sleepless weeks since. I wasn't surprised. Not really. Shocked, yes. Devastated, absolutely. But surprised? No. That's what's been eating at me more than the betrayal itself. The realization that some part of me, some deep and cowardly part, had known for a very long time. Margaret and I met in 1982 at a community theater production of Our Town. I was building sets. She was playing Emily Webb. She had this laugh that started in her chest and bloomed outward, infectious and unguarded. After the final performance, I asked her to get coffee. We were married 8 months later in her parents' backyard, with paper lanterns strung between the trees and her mother's roses in wild bloom. For the first decade, we were happy. At least, I think we were. Memory is such a dishonest narrator, especially now. But I remember Sunday mornings reading the paper in bed, her cold feet pressed against my shins. I remember the summer we painted the entire house ourselves, ending each day covered in ocean mist and buttercream, laughing at our speckled arms. We never had children, not by choice, at least not conscious choice. We kept saying someday. And then Margaret was 37, then 42, and someday had quietly slipped into never. We didn't talk about it much. That should have been my first clue about how we handled disappointment. We simply didn't. We papered over it with plans for the next vacation, the next home improvement project, the next distraction. The signs started small. So small I didn't even recognize them as signs at all. It must have been around our 15th anniversary when I noticed Margaret had started wearing perfume to her book club meetings. She'd never been much for perfume, said it gave her headaches, but suddenly there was this subtle, floral scent clinging to her clothes on Thursday evenings. When I mentioned it once, she said Carol had given everyone samples at the last meeting. I believed her. Of course I believed her. Why wouldn't I? The book club had started a few years earlier, a group of 6 women who met every other week to discuss literature and drink too much wine, or so Margaret said. She'd come home energized from those meetings, her cheeks flushed, talking about symbolism in Toni Morrison, or the unreliable narrator in some debut novel I'd never heard of. I was happy she had something that was hers. My work as an architect kept me busy, often consumed. It seemed only fair that she had her own orbit. But looking back now, I can see how those Thursday nights gradually shifted. She started buying new clothes, nothing flashy, just nicer than her usual casual style. She got her hair cut shorter, more modern. She joined a gym. Just trying to take better care of myself, she said, and I nodded approvingly, supportively, blind as a newborn mole. I remember one night, maybe 18 years into our marriage, when she came home from book club later than usual, nearly midnight. I'd fallen asleep on the couch watching Letterman. When I woke, she was standing in the doorway, and something about her expression made me pause. She looked flushed, yes, but also stricken. Guilty, maybe. Our eyes met for a long moment. Sorry I'm so late. We got into this amazing discussion about the English patient and just lost track of time. No problem, I replied, and went back to sleep. That was it. That was my moment. Maybe the first real moment when I could have asked more questions. When I could have sat up and really looked at my wife and asked if everything was okay. If we were okay. But I didn't. Because asking meant facing the possibility of an answer I didn't want to hear. The thing about self-deception is that it's not passive. It's not something that just happens to you. It's an active choice you make, over and over every single day. It's a muscle you build until it becomes stronger than your instinct for truth. In our mid-20s together, Margaret started taking weekend watercolor classes. She'd always been artistic. It was one of the things I loved about her, but she'd let it fall away during the busy years. The classes were in the city, about an hour's drive, and they ran from 9 to 5 on Saturdays. "You should come sometime," she said once, but her tone was perfunctory, obligatory. She didn't want me there, and I didn't want to go. I had my golf, my projects around the house, my comfortable routine. She'd return from these classes with paintings, flowers, landscapes, still lifes. They were good, really good, and I told her so. I mounted them in frames and hung them around the house. Look at us, I thought. Look at how we support each other's passions. But there was this one Saturday, maybe 3 years into these classes, when I'd been laid up with a brutal flu. Margaret had still gone to her class, and in my feverish afternoon, I'd stumbled to the bathroom for more medicine. Her phone was on the counter. It lit up with a text, "Can't wait to see you later. Been thinking about last week." No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I stood there, shivering in my boxers and t-shirt, staring at those words. My heart was hammering, but not just from the fever. I knew in that moment exactly what I was looking at. The human brain is capable of remarkable interpretation. We pattern recognize better than any computer. I knew what that text meant, and I did nothing. I told myself it was probably someone from her class that last week referred to some painting technique they'd discussed. That I was being paranoid and foolish, and that fever was making me irrational. I took my medicine and went back to bed. When Margaret came home that evening, I didn't mention it. Not that day, not ever. You have to understand, I loved my life. I loved our house with its blue shutters and the garden Margaret had cultivated over decades. I loved our Saturday farmers market routine, our Sunday crossword puzzle ritual, our winter evenings by the fireplace. I loved the comfortable silence between us, the way we moved around each other in the kitchen like practiced dancers. Or maybe I just loved the idea of my life, the story I'd been telling myself about who we were. Margaret had a colleague at the library where she worked, a man named David Chen. She mentioned him sometimes. He was funny, he was smart, he'd recommended some podcast about the history of typography. When the library staff had their annual holiday party, I'd met him once or twice. He seemed nice enough. Married, kids, glasses, receding hairline, safe. But then Margaret started mentioning him more often. David thought this, David said that. The library was planning a renovation, and Margaret was on the committee with David. They had to meet after hours sometimes to discuss plans. They texted about work matters. Once, when we were at a restaurant, her phone buzzed and she glanced at it and smiled, really smiled. The kind of smile that lights up your whole face before putting it away. "David?" I asked. "Yeah, he just sent me this funny meme about the Dewey Decimal System." She showed me. It was mildly amusing. We went back to our meal. I never asked if there was more to it. I never suggested that maybe these late meetings were too frequent, that maybe the texting seemed excessive, because asking would have made it real. Asking would have forced me to confront something I desperately didn't want to confront. Our 30th anniversary was supposed to be a milestone. Margaret wanted to go to Italy. We'd always talked about it, but never gone. I'd been promoted to senior partner at my firm, and we could finally afford it. But then the trip kept getting postponed. First, Margaret's mother got sick. Then my firm landed a major project that needed my attention. Then Margaret said maybe we should wait until fall, when the crowds would be smaller. We never went. Instead, we had dinner at our usual Italian restaurant downtown, the one where they knew our order, and the owner always came over to chat. It was nice, pleasant. We came home and watched a movie and went to bed. I remember lying there in the dark afterward, listening to Margaret's breathing and feeling this vast emptiness open up inside me. 30 years, 3 decades, more than half my life. And I felt lonely in a way I'd never felt before. A loneliness that existed right next to another person. Maybe because of that person. Margaret, I whispered into the dark. Are you happy? The question hung there, enormous and terrifying. I waited for her answer, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. Of course. Why would you ask that? No reason, just wondering. She rolled over, and within minutes her breathing had deepened into sleep. But I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, knowing I'd chickened out, again, because I hadn't really asked what I wanted to ask. I'd asked a safe question that allowed for a safe answer. What I'd really wanted to ask was, are you having an affair? Or maybe, do you still love me? Or perhaps, when did we become strangers who share a bed? The years blurred together in that particular way they do when you're not paying attention, when you're just going through the motions. Margaret took up yoga. She traveled more for the library. Conferences in Chicago, workshops in Boston, a seminar in Seattle. I believed every explanation, every itinerary she shared. Or maybe I didn't believe them, but I pretended to. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. There was a night, maybe 5 years ago now, when I woke around 2 in the morning and found Margaret's side of the bed empty. I went downstairs and found her sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, just sitting there, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. What's wrong? I asked, genuinely concerned. She looked at me, and in the dim light from the street lamp outside, her face looked so sad it took my breath away. I don't know. I don't know. I should have pulled up a chair. I should have sat with her in that darkness and asked her to tell me everything, all of it, whatever was hurting her, whatever we'd become. I should have been brave enough for both of us. Instead, I touched her shoulder and said, "Come back to bed, everything will look better in the morning." And she did, and it didn't. The receipt from the Grand Marlowe wasn't even the worst of it. After I found it, after that moment in the hallway, I did what I should have done decades ago. I looked, really looked. Her email was still logged in on the shared iPad we used in the kitchen. I'm not proud of reading it, but I needed to know. I needed to finally know. The affair wasn't with David Chen. It was with someone named Michael, a man she'd met at one of those library conferences 2 years ago. He lived in New Hampshire. He was divorced. He wrote her poetry, for God's sake. Poetry. The emails went back 26 months. 26 months of "I miss you," and "I can't stop thinking about our weekend together," and "I wish things were different." I read them all. Every single one. I sat at the kitchen table with that iPad and read through the entire archive of my wife's secret life, watching the sun set and the room grow dark around me. And you know what the strangest part was? Even then, even with the evidence glowing on the screen in front of me, part of me wanted to put the iPad down, clear the browser history, and pretend I'd never seen it. Part of me wanted to go back to not knowing, back to the comfortable fiction, but I couldn't. Once you really see something, you can't unsee it, no matter how hard you try. When Margaret came home that evening, it was Wednesday, which meant she'd been at yoga. I was still sitting at the table. I'd turned on a lamp. The iPad sat in front of me like an accusation. She knew immediately. I watched her face cycle through emotions too quickly to name. Shock, fear, guilt, defiance, resignation. "How long have you known?" she asked, which was such a strange first question. 45 minutes. but I think part of me has known for years. She set down her yoga mat and her purse. She didn't cry. Neither did I. We just looked at each other, across the kitchen that we'd renovated together 12 years ago. Across the life we'd built and shared and hollowed out from the inside. I'm sorry. Which part are you sorry for? She flinched at that. All of it, but mostly for not being brave enough to leave when I should have. There it was. The truth, finally. Not that she'd had an affair, but that she'd wanted out and hadn't known how to say it. When did you stop loving me? Walter, just tell me. After all these years, you owe me honesty. She sat down across from me. In the lamplight, I could see every one of her 62 years, the lines around her eyes, the silver threaded through her hair. She was still beautiful. That made it worse somehow. I don't think there was one moment. We just drifted. You got absorbed in your work, and I got absorbed in mine. And somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and started being roommates. And I didn't know how to fix it, and you didn't seem to notice it was broken. And so I found someone who made me feel alive again. I would have noticed if you'd let me, if you'd said something. Would you have, Walter? When was the last time you asked me how I was really feeling? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about what to have for dinner or whether we needed to refinance the mortgage? I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She was right. You noticed things were off. I know you did. I could see it sometimes, this look in your eyes like you were about to ask me something important. But then you just let it go, and I let you let it go because it was easier than facing the truth. We've been separated for 6 weeks now. Margaret is staying with her sister, actually staying with her sister this time. We've told our friends that we're taking some time to figure things out, which is what you say when you're 63 and 62 and your marriage of 40 years is ending. The house feels enormous without her. I wander from room to room, seeing her everywhere, in the throw pillows she chose, in the photographs on the walls, in the coffee mugs arranged in the cabinet. I've been thinking a lot about signs, about all the moments over all those years when I chose comfort over truth, chose ignorance over knowledge. The perfume, the text message, the late nights, the smile at her phone, the trips that multiplied, the distance that grew like a canyon between us while we slept in the same bed. I tell myself that I didn't see them, that I didn't know. But that's not quite true, is it? I saw them. I just looked away. Last week, I went to see a therapist, Dr. Reyes, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. I told her everything, the affair, the signs, the decades of willful blindness. Why do you think you ignored it? She asked. Because I was afraid of losing her, of being alone, of having to admit that the life I thought I had wasn't real. And now I've lost her anyway. Now I am alone. And the life definitely wasn't real. She leaned forward. But now you're not hiding from it anymore. That's different, isn't it? I suppose it is. The thing I'm learning, too late, but still, is that ignoring problems doesn't make them go away. It just makes them fester and grow until they destroy everything from the inside out. A marriage is like a house in that way. If you see a crack in the foundation and you just hang a picture over it, the crack doesn't stop spreading. Eventually, the whole structure comes down. Margaret and I, we saw the cracks, both of us. We just decided to keep hanging pictures. I've started going through old photo albums, which is probably masochistic, but I can't seem to help myself. There we are on our wedding day, impossibly young, beaming at the camera with the certainty of people who have no idea what's coming. There we are on a beach in Maine, Margaret laughing as a wave soaks her skirt. There we are at my mother's funeral, clinging to each other for support. What happened to those people? But that's not the right question, is it? Those people are still here. We just stopped tending to them. We stopped checking in, stopped being curious about each other, stopped doing the hard work of staying connected. We let the routine replace the relationship. I think about all the conversations we didn't have, all the questions I didn't ask, all the times I settled for surface when I could have dug deeper. How was your day? Instead of, what's weighing on your heart? That's nice, honey. Instead of, tell me more about that. We became experts at shallow water, Margaret and I. We skimmed along the surface of our lives together, never diving down to where it was dark and scary and real. I saw her yesterday. We met for coffee to discuss the logistics of separation. The house, the finances, the stuff of dismantling 40 years. She looked good, better than she has in years. There was a lightness to her that I realized I hadn't seen in a very long time. You seem happy, I said. And I meant it. I'm not, but I'm honest. And that feels better than I expected. We talked for 2 hours. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in decades. She told me about Michael, about how guilty she'd felt, about how trapped. I told her about the signs I'd seen and ignored, about my cowardice. Why didn't you ever confront me? If you suspected something, why didn't you just ask? Because I was afraid of the answer. Because I thought if I didn't acknowledge it, it might not be real. Because I'm an idiot who thought he could preserve something by refusing to examine it. She reached across the table and took my hand. We're both idiots. I should have left when I stopped being in love with you. Or I should have tried harder to fall back in love with you. Instead, I did this half-life thing where I stayed physically but left emotionally, and that was cruel to both of us. When did you stop being in love with me? She thought about it for a long time. I don't think I stopped loving you. I just started loving the idea of someone else more. Someone who didn't know all my worst parts, who couldn't see all the ways I'd failed and disappointed. Someone who let me be someone new. But you didn't fail me, Margaret, didn't I? We wanted children, Walter. We wanted this big, full life, and instead we got this quiet, small existence. And somewhere along the way, I blamed you for it, even though it wasn't your fault. I blamed us. I understood that. The disappointment we'd never processed, the dreams we'd never mourned, they'd sat between us like ghosts, taking up space we pretended wasn't there. I'm trying to figure out what comes next. The lawyers are handling the divorce. It's amicable as far as divorces go. We're splitting everything 50-50. Fair and equitable, they call it. Though there's nothing fair about the dissolution of half a lifetime together. I'm selling the house. It's time. I can't keep living in this museum of our life together, surrounded by evidence of everything we built and everything we let crumble. I'm moving to a condo downtown, one of those modern places with big windows and an open floor plan. Somewhere without memories embedded in every corner. Somewhere I can start over. There's a photograph that keeps drawing me back. It's from our 20th anniversary. We'd gone to Vermont to see the fall foliage, stayed in a bed and breakfast with a view of the mountains. In the photo, we're on a hiking trail, arms around each other, the trees behind us ablaze with color. We look happy. We look like a couple who has it all figured out. But I remember that trip. I remember Margaret being distant, distracted. I remember lying in the bed and breakfast's queen bed, listening to her breathe beside me, feeling like she was 1,000 miles away. I remember thinking that something was wrong, but not knowing what to do about it. I remember taking this photograph and thinking, there, now we look happy. Now we have proof, as if a photograph could make something true. I'm keeping the photo, but not to display. I'm putting it in a box with other things I need to remember. The hotel receipt, some of the emails I printed out, reminders, not of her betrayal, but of mine, of the ways I betrayed myself by refusing to see what was right in front of me, of how I chose comfort over truth until truth became inescapable. I called my brother last night. Tom lives in Oregon, and we don't talk often, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, usually around holidays. But I needed to hear his voice, needed to talk to someone who's known me since before I was Walter and Margaret. "I'm getting divorced," I said after the usual pleasantries. Silence on the other end. Then, "Jesus, Walt, what happened?" I told him everything. The affair, the signs, the years of willful ignorance. He listened without interrupting. "You want to know the worst part? It's not even the cheating. It's realizing that I let it happen, that I saw it happening and just allowed it. What kind of person does that? A scared one. A person who's afraid of losing what they have, even when what they have is already slipping away. When did you get so wise?" He laughed. "Therapy, man. 3 years of it after my divorce. I did the same thing you did. Ignored the problems, hoped they'd fix themselves. Took me a long time to understand that avoiding conflict isn't the same as keeping the peace. Sometimes you have to risk everything blowing up if you want a chance at saving it. And if it blows up anyway, then at least you tried. At least you were honest. At least you can look at yourself in the mirror and know you didn't just let it die through neglect." After we hung up, I thought about that word, neglect. That's what Margaret and I had done, really. We'd neglected our marriage, the way you might neglect a plant. Just forgetting to water it, forgetting to check if it was getting enough light, until one day you notice it's brown and brittle and dead. Except we hadn't forgotten. We'd chosen not to look. We'd chosen to let it die, rather than do the hard work of keeping it alive. That's not an accident. That's a decision, made over and over, day after day, year after year. The divorce will be final in 3 months. We had to wait a year from the separation date. That's the law here. 1 year to prove you really mean it, I guess. Margaret is still with Michael. They're talking about him moving to this area, about trying to build something real now that it's not a secret anymore. I'm happy for her, in a complicated, painful sort of way. She deserves to be happy, even if it's not with me. I went on a date last week. First one in 40 years. A woman named Patricia, a widow I met at a book club I recently joined. We got dinner at a Thai place downtown, and it was nice, pleasant. At the end of the night, she asked if I wanted to do it again sometime. "Can I be honest with you?" I said. "Please. I don't think I'm ready. Not because of you, you're wonderful, but because I'm still figuring out how to be just Walter, not Walter and Margaret. And I need to get that right before I can be Walter and anyone else." She smiled, and it was kind. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in a long time. The truth. It seems like such a simple thing, but it's the hardest thing in the world. Easier to smile and nod and pretend everything's fine. Easier to ignore the warning signs and the red flags and the voice in your head that's trying to tell you something's wrong. But easier doesn't mean better. Easier just means you get to postpone the reckoning, and the bill always comes due eventually, usually with interest. Yesterday was moving day at the old house. The new owners, a young couple with a baby on the way, came by for the final walkthrough. They moved through the rooms with such excitement, pointing out where they'd put the crib, how they'd repaint the kitchen, what they'd do with the backyard. They looked at this house and saw a possibility, a future. All I could see was the past. As I handed over the keys, the young woman, Rachel, her name was, said something that's been echoing in my mind ever since. "Thank you for taking such good care of this place. You can tell it was loved." Loved, past tense. But she was right. This house had been loved once. The marriage it contained had been loved once. And even though both were ending, that love had been real. Maybe that's what I need to remember. Not just the failure and the blindness and the betrayal, but the love that came before. The Sunday mornings and the renovation projects and the quiet evenings. They happened. They mattered. They were real, even if they couldn't last. I'm learning that grief isn't linear. Some days I wake up feeling okay, ready to face the world, optimistic about the future. Other days I can barely get out of bed, crushed by the weight of everything I've lost. But I'm not running from it. I'm not burying myself in work or distractions or pretending it doesn't hurt. I'm sitting with it, feeling it fully, because I know now that unfelt pain doesn't go away. It just goes underground, poisoning everything from below. Next month, I'm going to Italy, by myself, the trip Margaret and I never took together. I'm taking alone. I've been reading travel books, planning an itinerary, practicing basic Italian phrases. It feels good to have something to look forward to, something that's entirely mine. Margaret and I used to talk about walking through Florence, seeing the David, eating gelato by the Trevi Fountain. Now I'll do those things alone, and they'll be mine, not ours. Different than I'd imagined. But maybe that's okay. Maybe better, even. The writing has helped. Getting all of this down, seeing it in words rather than just cycling through my mind endlessly. The narrative I'd built about my life, Walter and Margaret, happy couple, solid marriage, was a fiction, a collective delusion we maintained together. The truth is messier. We were two people who loved each other and hurt each other and failed each other in slow, ordinary ways. What I know now is this: love requires attention, marriage requires honesty, and fear, no matter how understandable, is a terrible compass for navigating your life. Signs are only signs if you look at them. You can't preserve something by refusing to examine it. Comfort and happiness are not the same thing. It's possible to love someone and still lose them, to spend 40 years with someone and still be strangers, to see something coming and still be devastated when it arrives. Starting over at 63 is terrifying and exhausting, and occasionally, surprisingly, exhilarating. Regret is only useful if it teaches you something, if it changes how you move forward. And perhaps most importantly, it's never too late to open your eyes. Never too late to stop running from truth. Never too late to choose courage over comfort. Margaret taught me that in the end, not through our marriage, but through its ending. She was brave enough to risk everything for a chance at real happiness. I'm trying to be that brave too, in my own way. Brave enough to face what I avoided, to feel what I numbed, to build something authentic from the ruins of what was comfortable. This isn't the life I planned. It's not the story I thought I was living, but it's real, and it's mine, and I'm finally paying attention. That's something. After 40 years of willful blindness, that's something. Tomorrow I leave for Italy. I've packed light, just a carry-on and a backpack. Everything I need fits in 2 bags. Tonight, my last night before this adventure, I'm sitting in my condo, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Margaret is building her new life with Michael. My old house is filling up with Rachel and her husband's dreams. The world is spinning on, indifferent to my grief and growth. And I'm here, just Walter, 63 years old, divorced, starting over, scared and sad and strangely hopeful. I think about that young man who built sets for our town all those years ago, who fell in love with a girl playing Emily Webb. I wish I could go back and tell him things. That the play he's building sets for is prophetic, that we really don't know what we have while we have it, that we sleepwalk through our lives until it's too late. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is wake up now, today, and choose differently going forward. So that's what I'm doing. Waking up, opening my eyes, paying attention. Tomorrow, I'll board a plane to Italy, carrying nothing but a light bag and 4 decades of hard-won wisdom. I'll walk the streets of Florence alone, eat gelato by the Trevi Fountain alone, stand before the David alone. But I won't be lonely, because for the first time in years, maybe ever, I'll be fully present, fully honest, fully myself.